Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're embarking on quite a fascinating journey. We're looking into two really fundamental human institutions, marriage and family.
Yeah, fundamental is the word. And we've gathered, well, a whole stack of sources, research papers, anthropological studies, cultural insights from all over.
Our mission for this deep dive really is to pull out the most important bits of knowledge about these, well, constantly changing structures.
Exactly. You might think you've got a handle on what marriage or family means, but as we kind of unpack the material, you'll likely find some surprising facts. Ideas that might even shift how you see things.
We'll explore, everything from ancient customs to modern trends, economic pressures, shifting values, all trying to help you connect the dots.
See the bigger picture.
Right. Hopefully you'll have some aha moments because this stuff, it gets really interesting when you dig in.
Definitely.
Okay, so let's start by unpacking some ideas about marriage. Have you ever stopped to think how specific cultural rules actually shape who marries whom? It's often not about romance, is it?
Not primarily, no. Take the concept of hypergamy, where a woman marries up socially.
Right.
What's really striking is how detailed it gets. Like in North India, it's not just broad classes or varna. Within the Brahmin varna, you have subcastes, jati.
Okay.
So a girl from a, say, lower Brahmin jati like Pandi marrying into a higher one like Shukla, that's hypergamy right there on a micro level.
Wow. So these really fine social layers are influencing huge life choices.
Absolutely. It makes you ask how much personal choice is really involved versus social structure.
And if we look at what anthropologists sometimes call simple societies, traditional, non-industrial ones, the ways people actually find partners are incredibly varied. Sometimes, frankly, astonishing.
Oh, completely. Far from our modern idea of a sacred contract.
Yeah.
D.N. Majumdar, the anthropologist, he documented some really unique practices. For instance, marriage by probation.
Probation, like a trial run.
Exactly. Among the Kuki tribe, for example, a couple lives together intimately for a trial period. If it works out, great, they marry.
And if not?
If not, well, the boy might have to pay some compensation. It's very much like a contract, really pragmatic.
Imagine that. A trial marriage. Okay, what about something maybe more dramatic, like marriage by capture?
Yeah, that one sounds pretty forceful. And initially it probably was. But often, it seems, it evolved into something more ceremonial.
Like a staged abduction.
Kind of, yeah. It was apparently common even in places like Bihar, where a man might literally be captured and forced to marry.
Wow.
Then there's marriage by trial. This is where a young man has to prove his courage to win a bride.
Okay, like in the stories.
Pretty much. Think of young men in some African tribes needing to bring back canine teeth from wild animals. Or historically, Naga headhunters having to bring back an enemy head.
Talk about trying to impress the in-laws.
Right. Serious stuff.
And the practicalities just keep coming.
Yeah.
Marriage by purchase.
Yep. Paying a bride price. This often gave the husband rights, not just to his wife, but also to any children. Then there's marriage by service.
So if you can't afford the bride price.
Exactly. The groom works for the bride's family for a time. This was especially common if her family didn't have a son, a male heir.
Makes sense. And marriage by exchange.
Simple swap. Two families exchange women. Again, very practical.
Then you've got marriage by elopement, sometimes romantic, sometimes maybe more ceremonial.
And marriage by intrusion. This one's fascinating. Found notably in Tarkand. A girl who wants a particular boy just moves into his house, uninvited.
Seriously, what happens then?
She basically endures humiliation, sometimes even violence from his family, until they finally give in and accept her. It shows incredible determination, maybe a form of agency, even in tough circumstances.
That's intense. Okay, one more. Inheritance of widow or levirate?
Right, where a man's brother inherits his widow,
Yeah.
keeps her and any children within the family group.
But you mentioned a really striking variation among some Nagas.
Yes, get this. A son is obligated to inherit his father's widow, obviously. Not his own biological mother, but his stepmother.
Why would they do that?
Purely economics. To prevent the family property from being divided up. Keep the wealth consolidated.
So when you look at all these different ways of forming unions, what does it really say about the whole sacred bond idea of marriage?
Well, it shows pretty clearly that marriage, historically and cross-culturally, is deeply tied to economics, social structure, even just basic survival strategies. It's often far more about the group than just individual romantic love.
Which kind of brings us neatly to a really big modern trend, doesn't it? The decline of marriage as this central institution.
Yeah, that's a huge shift we're seeing globally. Marriage seems to be losing some of its credibility, its stability. For some people, it even seems to inspire a bit of fear.
Why is that happening? What's driving it?
There are several factors, but economic reasons seem pretty central. The sheer cost of living, for one.
Right, weddings are expensive, raising kids is expensive.
Exactly. If you're struggling just to make ends meet, taking on the financial weight of a family feels overwhelming, maybe impossible.
And I guess changing gender roles must be massive here too, especially women's economic independence.
Oh, absolutely pivotal.
Hmm.
Historically, men were often the main providers, the protectors.
The breadwinners.
Right. But as women gain the power and means to provide for themselves, that economic incentive for them to marry really decreases. For some women, marriage might even start to look like a bad bargain that limits their freedom.
Okay, so if marriage is also a legal contract, are legal factors part of this decline too?
Definitely.
Yeah.
In many places, the laws around marriage, especially divorce laws and how property gets divided,
Yeah.
it can make marriage feel like a kind of legal trap.
Hmm.
Particularly, some sources suggest, for men who worry about losing assets or facing disadvantages if things don't work out.
Hmm. And then there are the shifting social norms and values. You hear different perspectives on this.
You do. For instance, you have groups sometimes called the New Right. They tend to argue that the decline in marriage is linked to a sort of moral decline.
What do they mean by that?
They point to the increasing acceptance of things like cohabitation or same-sex relationships, arguing that this diversity erodes the traditional sacredness of marriage and makes people less willing to commit to it. We're just reporting their view here, of course.
Got it. But there are other views.
Oh, yes. Postmodern thinkers like Ulrich Beck talk about rising individualism and consumerism. This leads to what he calls risk consciousness.
Risk consciousness.
Yeah, people are more aware of the risks involved in long-term commitments. They might prefer more flexible arrangements, negotiated families that only last as long as they meet everyone's needs.
That makes sense. And less stigma too, right?
Much less stigma around living together or being single. Stephanie Kuntz wrote about this in The Way We Never Were, challenging that old ideal of the nuclear family.
So the big question this raises is marriage becoming just another lifestyle choice? Like choosing a brand rather than a lifelong commitment? What do you think?
It's a really profound question to wrestle with.
Okay, so all this talk about marriage, it naturally leads us straight into family, doesn't it?
Inevitably.
Most of us probably have a picture in our head. Family. Early definitions, like Elliot and Merrill's, were pretty straightforward. A husband, wife, and kids biological unit. Simple, but is it really that simple?
Well, many sociologists try to refine that. Burgess and Locke, for example, called family a biological social unit, united by marriage, blood, or adoption, living together, sharing roles, creating a common culture.
Still sounds pretty biological at its core.
They definitely emphasize the biological aspect, rooted in, quote, institutionalized sex and reproduction. For them, that biological link was what made family different from other social groups.
But here's a critical thinking point. Should we accept that family is primarily biological? Is it more biological than social?
That's exactly where people like David Schneider push back. He argued that seeing family as mainly biological is a very Eurocentric view, focused on blood ties.
Okay, so what's his alternative?
He argued family is not just about biology. It's profoundly shaped, maybe even created, by social factors and actions.
Actions, not just blood. How does that work?
Well, his study of the Yap people in Micronesia was key. He found they didn't even really have a concept of biological fatherhood as we know it. Relationships were defined by the order of doing, what people did for each other, not the order of being, like blood ties.
And we see parallels today, right?
Everywhere. Think about single-parent families, adoptive families, families formed through surrogacy or other reproductive technologies. The care, the intimacy, the responsibility there, it's built on actions, on commitment, not just genes.
Right.
Janet Karsten's work in Malaysia even showed that sharing food regularly could literally make people relatives in their view. Kinship through doing.
So family can be formed in ways that completely bypass or dilute that traditional biological link, but the relationships are just as real. What about chosen families?
That's another powerful idea brought forward by Kate Weston. People forming deep, meaningful family bonds based purely on shared experience, emotional connection, mutual support, completely outside of blood or marriage ties.
Especially common in, say, LGBTQ plus communities historically, but broader now too.
Exactly. So it really forces the question, if family isn't just biology, what makes it universal? if it even is universal.
George Peter Murdoch famously argued it was universal.
He did, based on his huge cross-cultural survey, 250 societies.
And his definition was?
Pretty specific. A social group with common residence, economic cooperation, accepted sexual relations between two adults of opposite sexes, and at least one child, their own or adopted.
And he said it performed key functions nobody else did as well.
4 key functions, according to Murdoch.
Mhm.
Regulating sex, reproduction, economic cooperation, and education or socialization of children. He argued no other institution could bundle all those functions so effectively.
There were challenges to his definition, weren't there?
Big challenges. Kathleen Goss' study of the Nair people in India was a major one.
What did she find?
Basically, a system where there wasn't a lifelong marriage bond, as Murdoch defined it, no shared household between the woman and her recognized sexual partners, and no economic pooling between them.
So under Murdoch's definition, the Nair either had no family, which seems unlikely.
Or his definition was flawed, too narrow.
Exactly.
And what about family structures that don't fit the husband-wife model, like single-parent homes or same-sex families?
Right. Matrifocal families, basically a mother and her dependent children, are incredibly common globally, especially in urban areas among certain communities like, historically, Afro-Americans in some contexts. They don't fit Murdoch neatly.
And same-sex households.
Same issue. Households headed by 2 men or 2 women raising children directly contradict his opposite-sex adults requirement. Yet, are they not families? Most people today would say they absolutely are.
So if Murdoch's structural definition has these holes, is there a more fundamental, truly universal core to family?
Well, an Israeli anthropologist, Yanina Sharon, proposed a different idea. She argued the most basic, near-universal unit is what she called the female carer core.
Okay, what's that?
It's simply a female carer, usually the mother, but could be a grandmother, an aunt, even a paid helper, and a dependent child or children. And that's found everywhere.
Pretty much. Sharon argues this minimal unit is essential for the continuation of any human society. It focuses on the nurturing function, which seems more constant than specific structures like marriage or residence. Does that simpler idea make more sense to you?
It does seem to capture something fundamental about care and dependency. Okay, moving beyond just what family is, let's touch on its different forms. We know marriage type matters, monogamous, polygynous, polyandrous families.
Right. But where people live after marriage also creates different family structures, residence patterns.
Ah, yes, the locals.
Exactly. The most common globally, according to Murdoch's data anyway, is patrilical. That's about 67%, where the wife moves to the husband's father's home or community.
The matrilocal.
The opposite. Husband moves to the wife's mother's place. Much less common, maybe 15%. Then you have bilocal.
Bilocal.
Kind of flexible. The couple chooses to live near or with either spouse's relatives, often based on convenience or resources, maybe 7%.
And neolocal. That sounds modern.
It is. That's where the couple sets up a completely new, independent home, away from both families. Common in industrial societies, but globally, only about 5% in Murdoch's sample.
Any others?
One rarer one is avunculocal. The couple lives with or near the husband's mother's brother, his maternal uncle. About 4%.
Okay, that's a lot of patterns. Why the differences? Is it just cultural habit, or are there reasons?
Oh, there are definite reasons, according to research by Ember and Ember. They linked residence patterns to specific social and economic factors.
Like what?
Well, commercialization tends to drive neolocal residents.
How so?
When you have a money economy, people can sell their labor, earn wages, and buy what they need. They're less dependent on their extended kin group for land or resources, so they can move where the jobs are and set up their own home.
Financial independence leads to residential independence. Makes sense. What about something like bilocal residence, that flexible one?
That often seems to emerge out of necessity, especially after, say, a major population decline from epidemics or disasters.
Ah, so survival dictates it.
Exactly. Couples might live with whichever set of relatives survived or has better resources. It's about maximizing chances. We see this adaptation in groups like the Juhuansi and the Kalahari dealing with scarce water, or historically in places like Samoa after colonization brought new diseases that decimated the population.
Wow, that's adaptation under pressure. What about conflict? Does warfare influence where families live?
Hugely influential, according to Ember and Ember. Depends on the type of warfare.
Okay.
If a society faces frequent internal warfare conflicts with nearby groups, neighbors.
High risk of surprise attacks.
Precisely. In that situation, societies strongly tend towards patrilocal residence.
Why patrilocal?
Keep the sons together in their home village. A related group of males forms a stronger, more reliable defense force when attacks can come at any time. Security trumps other factors.
Okay, keep the warriors close. What if the warfare is mostly external? Enemies are further away.
Then the immediate threat of surprise attack is lower, so other factors can become more important in deciding residence.
Like economics.
Exactly. If women are the primary contributors to subsistence, say, in a horticultural society where women do most of the farming, then the tendency is towards matrilocal residence. Keep the daughters together, working the land.
And if men contribute more, local.
Correct. It's fascinating how these practical survival and economic needs shape something so seemingly personal. It makes you wonder, how might modern issues, like maybe community safety concerns or economic migration, still be influencing where families choose to live today, even in subtle ways?
That's a great question. Now, here's where it gets really interesting for me. A study by Schlegel and Berry connected these residence patterns to teenage rebellion.
Yes. It's a fantastic piece of research. They looked at adolescent rebellion cross-culturally.
And what did they find?
They found that in societies where children are highly dependent on their parents for their future for inheriting land, property, wealth, status rebellion is basically a foolish act. The costs are too high.
So dependence suppresses rebellion.
Largely, yes. But in societies with high rates of neolocal residence, where people move away for jobs, and perhaps where there are strong social safety nets.
Like Scandinavia, maybe?
Like Norway, which they mention, where children's economic dependence on their parents is much lower. Rebellious attitudes are much more likely to emerge and be tolerated.
So teenage angst isn't just universal hormones. It's shaped by culture, by economics, by family structure.
That's what the evidence strongly suggests. Nurture and context play a huge role. They cite another study from Morocco suggesting that authoritarian political structures and very dominant parental roles demanding obedience also tend to suppress adolescent rebellion. Culture overriding biology, perhaps.
Fascinating. Okay, so beyond residence, families are also classified by authority, right?
Yep. Patriarchal male-dominated. Matriarchal female-dominated, though true matriarchies seem extremely rare. Often societies described that way, like the Hopi, are more egalitarian in practice than a simple mirror of patriarchy.
And egalitarian meaning shared power.
Right. And finally, by size or composition. You have the basic conjugal family, just the married couple, then the nuclear family couple and their dependent children.
Which can be the family you grew up in, family of orientation, or the one you form as an adult family of procreation.
Exactly. And then you have joint or extended families, larger groups, multiple generations or multiple siblings and their families living together.
Ah, the famous joint family. We hear so much about that, particularly in India.
We do. Irwadi Karv gave a classic definition. A group living under one roof, eating food cooked at one hearth, holding property in common, participating in common worship, and related as kindred.
That shared kitchen, the hearth, seems key to the jointness.
It really is symbolic.
Yeah.
Which leads us perfectly into the next big debate. Is the Indian joint family actually dying out?
Yeah. For ages, it was seen as the timeless Indian norm. Even colonial scholars saw it that way. But is that traditional structure still holding up?
Well, Pauline Kalinda did a huge review of studies back in the day. She found joint families were most common in the Gangetic Plains, less so elsewhere. And interestingly, strongest among upper caste and landed groups.
Less common among lower castes or landless laborers. Why would that be?
Bernard Cohen studied a village, Senapur, and found several reasons. First, simple demographics. Lower life expectancy often meant you just didn't have 3 generations alive at the same time to form a joint family.
Okay. Practical reality.
Second, economics. If you're landless laborers, there's no joint property to hold together.
Oh.
Everyone needs to earn individually. The economic glue isn't there.
No jointness advantage, as you put it earlier.
Right. Third, the typical division of labor in a joint family, men earn outside, women manage the house, breaks down if women also have to go out and work for wages.
Can't maintain the structure.
And finally, mobility. Daily wage earners often have to move for work, making settled joint living really difficult.
Yet even these groups, scholars like M.N. Srinivas noted, often idealized the joint family, didn't they? They might adopt it if their circumstances improved.
Yes, through that process he called Sanskritization. It suggests a deep cultural value, even if the reality doesn't always match. But the big question remains, is modernization actually causing these families to disintegrate?
What's the argument for yes?
Scholars like A.D. Ross, F.G. Bailey, Ram Mehta argued strongly for disintegration. Ross found many urban middle-class families in Bangalore becoming nuclear ties weakening. Bailey argued modern jobs create divergent interests and incomes that pull joint families apart.
And Meta pointed to specific
Yeah,
factors.
several. Economic changes, money replacing traditional obligations, diverse jobs pulling people away from ancestral homes. Educational changes, modern education, fostering skepticism about old customs, questioning traditional roles, especially for women. Feminism plays a role here too.
Okay.
Legal changes, things like inheritance laws, land reforms, sometimes inadvertently incentivize families to divide property, at least on paper, which often led to real separation.
And just urbanization itself.
Right. City life, high density, small living spaces, more individualistic values makes maintaining large traditional joint households much harder. Tunney's shift from Gemeinschaft to Gesellschaft.
So that sounds like a pretty strong case for decline. Is there a counterargument? Are they maybe just adapting, not dying?
Absolutely, and this is where it gets complex. K.M. Kapadia's study in Gujarat offered a different view. He found that even when people moved to cities and lived in nuclear households,
Yeah.
they often maintained incredibly strong ties, functional ties with their family back in the village, sending money, visiting, helping out, residentially separate, but functionally still very connected, not isolated.
So the form changes, but the connection remains. Emotional, practical ties.
Precisely. An IP Desai's study in Mahuva, Gujarat, hammered this home. He found 74% of families were nuclear in residence, but functionally and in property terms, still joint. Only 5% were truly cut off.
So we might be overemphasizing living under one roof.
Desai certainly thought so. He argued we need a processual view. Family structures aren't just moving in one direction, joint to nuclear. It's a cycle.
A cycle.
Yeah. A joint family might break into nuclear units for a while, but those nuclear units might later expand, maybe when sons marry and become joint again. It's dynamic, not a one-way street. No family stays joint or nuclear forever.
That makes a lot more sense than a simple linear decline. Any other examples of adaptation?
Sure. B.P. Agrawal studied Marwadi communities in Mumbai. Urban migrants, but they maintained super strong village ties, sent money back, often planned to retire back there. And Pauline Kalenda, later in her career, even argued that modernization could strengthen joint families
Strengthen them. How?
by providing an economic cushion. Pooling resources in a joint family might allow them to afford better housing in the city, or a vehicle, things individuals couldn't manage alone. It can actually aid social mobility.
And census data supports this a bit.
Some data, like the 2011 Indian census, surprisingly showed a slight decrease in purely nuclear families in urban areas, possibly because high costs and space constraints are actually encouraging families to stick together or recombine.
Okay, this completely flips the simple modernization kills joint families narrative. And A.M. Shaw added another layer of critique, didn't he? About flawed assumptions.
Yes, Shaw argued the whole debate was often built on shaky ground. 3 flawed assumptions, he said.
What were they?
1, that ancient India was all villages and all families were joint. 2, that urbanization is only recent and only features nuclear families. 3, therefore, urbanization must be destroying the joint family.
And his research challenged this.
Definitely. He looked at census data from a Gujarat village way back in the 1820s, 30s. He found the average household size was already pretty small, around 4.5 people. No evidence that brothers always stuck together after their parents died.
So the golden age of universal joint families might be a myth.
Or at least an oversimplification. Shaw concluded that families are always experiencing progressive and regressive developments, growing and shrinking simultaneously. The overall picture might remain relatively stable over time.
And crucially, he made a distinction between household and family. Why is that important?
Hugely important. Shaw argued that census takers often just count households, people living together, and call them families. But a household is just a residential unit. People sharing a dwelling, maybe a kitchen, cooperating economically.
But they aren't necessarily related.
Exactly. Think of students sharing a flat, people in a hostel, an orphanage, even an Israeli kibbutz. They're households, defined by co-residence and cooperation. It's a practical, task-oriented arrangement, not necessarily a family based on kinship.
So my flatmates are a household, not a family. Got it. What about a domestic group? Is that different again?
It's a bit broader. A domestic group focuses on cooperation in daily life, economic activities, raising children, etc. But it's not limited to people living in the same house. It can span multiple households that maintain strong social and economic ties. Think of related families living in separate houses, but still farming land together, or pooling money, or sharing childcare. It highlights how family functions can persist even when people don't live together. It really challenges that idea that separate houses mean broken families.
Which leads us nicely into the even broader concept of kinship, doesn't it? Beyond just the household.
Exactly. Kinship is really the whole system of social organization based on recognized ties, real or sometimes assumed connections. It's about mapping out who you're related to and what that relationship means in terms of rights, obligations, social identity.
How do anthropologists study this?
Rob and Fox pointed out it deals with the basics: mating, birth, parenthood, shared ancestry, inheritance. They often use detailed genealogical charts to map these connections.
And there are different types of kinship ties.
Broadly, yes. Consanguineal ties relationships based on blood or shared descent, like parents and children, siblings.
Okay.
Affinal ties relationships created through marriage.
Yeah.
Your spouse, your in-laws.
Right. And you mentioned filial relationships earlier.
Yes, this is becoming more recognized. These are bonds created through actions, nurturing, care, or deep emotional connection, not necessarily blood or marriage. Think chosen families again, or the complex relationships created by adoption or assisted reproduction. Our understanding of connection keeps expanding.
So how societies trace who you're legally descended from is key. That's descent, right?
Precisely. Tracing your position through legal parents, which might or might not be your biological parents.
Yeah.
It can be unilinear, traced through only one line,
Either the mother's side
matrilineal,
or the father's side.
patrilineal, which is more common globally. There's also a super rare form called parallel descent, where men trace descent through men and women trace through women.
Okay. What about non-unilinear, tracing through both sides?
Several types there. Bilineal, sometimes called double descent.
Yeah.
You trace descent through both lines, but for different purposes. The Yako of Nigeria are a classic example. They might inherit immovable property, like land, from their father's side, patrilineally, but movable property, like livestock or currency, from their mother's side, matrilineally.
Interesting. And then what we're more familiar with.
Bilateral descent. This is common in most Western societies today. You recognize relatives on both your mother's side and your father's side as equally important, more or less.
But it's not about tracing a single line back generations.
Not really. It's more about a network of relatives spreading outwards, horizontally. Each person, each ego, has a unique set of recognized kin, their kindred.
So my kindred, the relatives I recognize would be slightly different from my brother's kindred, even though we share parents, because it includes our spouses, our in-laws.
Exactly. It's ego-focused. And bilateral kinship is particularly important, functionally, in societies that need flexibility. Maybe hunter-gatherers like the Juhuanzi facing resource scarcity, or societies with population decline. Horizontal ties for mutual support become crucial.
The other time.
There's ambilineal descent, which is a bit fuzzier. Individuals might have some choice about whether to affiliate with their mother's or father's group, often depending on circumstances, maybe which side offers better opportunities or resources, especially in times of crisis, seen sometimes in places like Samoa after depopulation.
And these descent rules create larger groups beyond the immediate family.
Yes, especially unilinear descent. You get lineages where everyone can trace their descent back to a known common ancestor. Then clans, where the common ancestor is assumed or mythical, not precisely known.
And bigger groups.
Multiple clans might form a phratry, kind of like a brotherhood. If a society is divided into two main descent groups, that's a moiety structure, like two halves. And ultimately, all these can be building blocks of a tribe.
Wow, what a journey we've taken from all those ancient ways of getting married, which were often incredibly practical.
To the complex reasons, marriage seems less central today. Economics, law, changing values.
And then diving into family. Questioning the simple biological definition, exploring families built on action, on choice.
Challenging Murdoch's universal model, considering Yanina Sharon's maybe more fundamental female carer core.
And wrestling with that whole debate about the Indian joint family. Is it dying or just constantly adapting, cycling through forms?
And finally, looking at kinship, households, domestic groups, and all the ways societies trace connection, patrilineal, matrilineal, bilateral. It really broadens the picture.
So after unpacking all of this, the question really comes back to you, listening. How does your understanding of family maybe shift a little?
What new perspectives do you have on the bonds that connect people? It seems clear that family is way more diverse, way more adaptable than we often assume.
Shaped by everything from economics and environment to law and individual choice.
Yeah, so maybe next time you think about your own family or the families around you, you can look beyond just the obvious ties. Consider those threads of action, of shared history, of choice, of circumstance.
Things that might bind people together just as strongly, maybe even more strongly than blood or a marriage certificate.
It's definitely something to reflect on.
It really is. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into marriage and family. We hope it's given you a richer, maybe more nuanced way to think about these absolutely fundamental human connections.